All right, so get this. We're diving into It's a Wonderful Life.
A holiday classic.
For sure, but with an article from the Epoch Times by Jeffery Tucker.
Oh, this is gonna be good.
It is really interesting stuff, actually.
What's the angle?
Well, you know how the FBI thought the film was communist propaganda?
Yeah, can you believe that?
Wild, right? They even wrote a memo about it.
Seriously.
Dead serious.
What do they say?
Hold on, let me see if I can find the exact quote. Here it is. They said the film represented rather obvious attempts to discredit bankers.
As a common tactic used by communists?
Exactly.
But Tucker totally disagrees with that assessment, right?
He does, big time.
He actually sees the film as, like, a celebration of free enterprise.
Yeah, and a really interesting look at the way banking works, or at least how it should work, according to him.
Right, like with the building and loan and the whole run on the bank scene.
Oh, man, talk about intense.
So much tension in that scene.
You can practically feel the fear in the air.
Right. And that's fractional reserve banking in a nutshell.
Which is what, exactly?
Well, it's basically, you know how banks only keep a fraction of deposits on hand?
Yeah, I've heard of that.
So the rest of the money, they lend it out, invest it, make it work.
Okay.
But the system relies heavily on trust.
Because if everyone wants their money back at the same time...
Exactly, the bank's in trouble.
Which is exactly what happens in the film.
Yep, a classic bank run.
And then George Bailey gives that amazing speech trying to calm everyone down.
Oh yeah, one of the best scenes in the movie.
It's so powerful, the way he explains that their money is actually helping their neighbors.
He says, your money's in Joe's house, right next to yours. And in the Kennedy house, and Mrs. Macklin's house, and 100 others.
Gives me chills every time I hear it.
It's a lesson in trust and community.
Right. Like, we're all in this together.
Exactly, and that's a key point that Tucker emphasizes throughout the article.
It really makes you think about the whole agreement between a bank and its depositors.
Yeah, like, what is a bank supposed to be doing with our money?
Is it just a safekeeping vault, or...
Or something more like an investment fund?
Right, because there's a big difference there.
Huge difference.
And Tucker actually points out that historically there have been different types of banking contracts.
Some focused on safekeeping, like you deposit your gold and they just guard it.
Basically like a safety deposit box.
Exactly. But then there are institutions like the building and loan in the film.
Where they actually invest the money, try to generate returns.
With the aim of making everyone's savings grow.
Right. But that also means the money isn't instantly available on demand.
It takes time to turn those investments into cash.
Which is where the whole trust factor comes in again.
Absolutely. People need to believe that the bank is making wise decisions.
And in the film, the building and loan wasn't doing anything shady, right?
Nope. They were operating within the bounds of their agreement with the depositors.
The panic was just fueled by, like, fear and rumors.
Exactly. No actual wrongdoing by George Bailey or his institution.
And this is where the contrast with Potter's Bank gets really interesting.
Yeah, Potter's a whole different story.
Like, he represents a more predatory kind of banking.
Maybe not predatory, but definitely a model that Tucker sees as problematic.
So what's the difference?
Well, Tucker argues that Potter embodies a type of banking that was becoming more common in the 1940s and really took off in the decades after.
And what's that?
A model built on leverage, risky investments, and the expectation of government bailouts if things go south.
Ah, so like the whole too big to fail problem we see today?
You got it.
And the article actually compares this to the 2008 financial crisis, doesn't it?
It does. Tucker draws a direct parallel between Potter's Bank and those huge financial institutions.
Ones that were over-leveraged, made bad bets, and needed a bailout.
Exactly.
And he points the finger at the Federal Reserve for, like, contributing to the problem.
Yeah, he argues that by acting as a lender of last resort, the Fed actually encourages risky behavior.
Makes sense. If you know you'll be bailed out, you're more likely to take risks.
Precisely.
So it's like a safety net that removes the consequences for bad decisions.
And that's where the concept of moral hazard comes in, which Tucker talks about a lot.
Okay, I've heard that term before, but refresh my memory. What exactly does it mean?
So, moral hazard is basically the idea that if you're shielded from the full consequences of your actions,
you're more likely to make riskier choices.
Exactly.
Because you know someone else will pick up the tab if things go wrong.
Right. So by backstopping the banking system, the Fed might actually be encouraging the very behavior that leads to financial crises.
Wow, that's a pretty provocative argument.
It is, and it challenges a lot of conventional wisdom about central banks and government intervention.
Yeah, it really makes you think about the role of the Fed and, like, how much power it has over the entire financial system.
And whether that power is always used wisely.
So we've got fractional reserve banking, moral hazard, and this whole question of government intervention.
It's a lot to unpack.
It is, and we haven't even touched on deposit insurance yet.
Oh, yeah, that's a whole other can of worms.
Right. We'll have to save that for the next part of our deep dive.
Definitely a lot more to discuss there. So, deposit insurance, right. It's supposed to protect people, make them feel safe about their money.
But in a way, it kind of backfires.
Yeah, how so?
Well, if banks know their depositors are covered no matter what.
It could make them less careful with their investments.
Right. Because even if they screw up, the government will step in and cover the losses.
You're getting it. That's exactly what Tucker argues in the article. He even compares it to, like, a moral hazard.
Hold on. Back up. Moral hazard. I'm not sure I follow.
Okay, so think of it this way. If you know you're not going to face the consequences of your actions.
You're more likely to take risks.
Exactly.
Because, hey, if it works out, great. And if it doesn't, well, someone else will clean up the mess.
Precisely.
And he's saying that's basically what's happening with the Federal Reserve and the banking system.
Yeah, by acting as a lender of last resort, the Fed creates this moral hazard.
So banks feel like they can take bigger risks because they know they'll be bailed out if things go wrong.
You got it.
And that's why Tucker argues for a more free market approach to banking.
A system where banks are fully responsible for their own actions.
No bailouts, no government intervention.
Exactly.
But wouldn't that mean more risk for individual depositors?
Potentially, but it would also force banks to be more transparent.
And make smarter investments.
Right, because their own survival would be on the line.
So it's a trade-off.
It is. More risk, but potentially more reward, too.
And more freedom for individuals to choose where they put their money.
To really understand this, Tucker brings up Bitcoin as an example.
Oh, wow. Bitcoin, that's a whole other world.
It is, but it's a good illustration of a system without a central bank or deposit insurance.
So in the Bitcoin world, you're basically on your own.
To a certain extent, yeah.
Yeah.
There are different models within the Bitcoin space, of course.
Like what?
Well, you have self-custody, where you hold your own Bitcoin.
So you're completely responsible for its safety and security.
Yep. And then there are exchanges, which offer various services.
Like what kind of services?
Trading, lending, borrowing, things like that.
So there's a range of options, but the key is individuals have more control over their own finances.
Exactly.
And they have to be more aware of the risks involved.
That's a big part of Tucker's argument. He thinks people should be more engaged with their money.
Not just blindly trusting institutions.
Right. Understand how things work, make informed decisions.
I like that idea in theory, but it seems like a lot to ask of the average person.
It's definitely a shift in mindset, but it's something that Tucker believes is essential for a healthier financial system.
So ultimately, he sees It's a Wonderful Life as a kind of warning.
A warning about what can happen when financial institutions become too powerful, too reliant on government support.
And when individuals become complacent.
Exactly. It's a reminder that we all have a role to play in creating a more stable and equitable financial system.
Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground here. Fractional reserve banking, moral hazard, Bitcoin, and even a bit of philosophy thrown in there.
It's a big topic, lots of different angles to explore.
It is, and it makes you wonder, where do we go from here? What does the future hold for banking?
That's the big question, isn't it? And I think It's a Wonderful Life offers some valuable insights, even though it was made over 70 years ago.
It really does make you think.
So before we wrap things up, what are your final thoughts?
It's pretty amazing how a film like this, a Christmas classic, can spark such a deep conversation about, well, money and banking and responsibility.
Yeah, it really gets you thinking.
And you know what strikes me? Tucker's point about how the FBI saw the film as, like, anti-capitalist.
Right, they totally missed the mark there.
They did, big time. Because It's a Wonderful Life isn't about tearing down the system. It's more like trying to make it better.
Yeah, it's like a call for a more ethical, more human-centered version of capitalism.
Exactly. And I think that's why it resonates with so many people, even today,
It does. It speaks to this desire for a system that works for everyone, not just a select few.
And that's where Tucker's argument about the different banking models comes in, right? Like the building and loan versus Potter's Bank.
Exactly. It's not just about individual personalities. It's about, like, two different philosophies of banking.
And the choices we make within those systems.
Exactly. Do we choose short-term profits over long-term stability? Do we prioritize individual gain over the well-being of the community?
These are big questions, and the film doesn't shy away from them.
It doesn't. It forces us to confront these issues head-on.
and to think about the consequences of our actions, both individually and collectively.
Which brings us back to that idea of trust, right?
Yeah, George Bailey has to rebuild trust in the building and loan after the run, and it makes you realize that trust is kind of the foundation of any financial system.
It is. Without trust, the whole thing falls apart.
And I think Tucker's argument is that true trust can only exist when there's real transparency and accountability.
Like, when you know where your money is going, how it's being used, and who's benefiting from it.
Right, and when institutions are held responsible for their actions.
That's how you build trust, by being open and honest, and by facing the consequences when things go wrong.
And maybe that's the biggest lesson we can take away from It's a Wonderful Life.
Maybe it is. It's a reminder that true wealth isn't just about money. It's about those human connections, the relationships we build, the communities we create.
And the values we uphold.
Exactly. It's about recognizing that we're all in this together, and that our choices have an impact on others, not just ourselves.
This has been such an eye-opening conversation. I feel like I have a whole new appreciation for It's a Wonderful Life.
It's a powerful film with a lot to say about the world we live in.
And I think it's more relevant now than ever.
So to all our listeners out there, I encourage you to watch It's a Wonderful Life again with these ideas in mind.
You might be surprised at what you discover.
It's a film that stays with you long after the credits roll.
And maybe, just maybe, it can inspire us to build a better, more just, and more compassionate world.
It's a beautiful thought.
It is. Thanks for joining us on this journey. We'll see you next time for another deep dive.